unhappy with the responsible party funding process and what they do use, the National Pollution Fund Center. That fund is created by contributions from the industry, the oil industry. And as money changes hands after a pollution incident, again, the national framework for it is Congress and the President have decided there's a spill, the responsible party cleans it up and pays. Okay? And pays people's claims and whatnot. If there's not a responsible party, for example, hurricane, huge storm, lots of oil just gets into the environment, act of God is an exemption for a responsible party, or you can't identify where the source is, then the backup mechanism is the National Pollution Fund Center, and then I go and hire contractors under pre-negotiated blanket operating arrangements with them, with contractors, to go out and take care of the spill, and the fund pays for it. And the fund is the ultimate backup. And the fund can also be the backup for the claims process, because then the fund has its ways of being able to go back to the responsible party for claims. I will say, anecdotally in this instance, and in many instances, the actual liability under the law for which under which the National Pollution Fund Center reviews claims is pretty strict, and so it's usually more advantageous to negotiate out something with if the responsible party has the resources and is a pretty large organization, because when the National Pollution Fund Center has to pay, they're under fairly tight holding the trust fund of the government standards on how they pay. That said, that's not part of the cleanup. That's a different issue. But they're the ones.
Just one quick follow-up. So is the National Pollution Fund Center, is that in any way an oversight agency?
They do not oversee the cleanup.
The claims process?
Yes.
Not necessarily we want to go to get money from that fund, but maybe just to have your help looking at the claims process.
Call them up and ask them. Yeah,
Who would I call?
I don't know if we have that number in the ACP. Look on, you can Google. They're right on the webpage.
I know who to call, but I don't want to tell you who to call. Okay?
No, we don't want to be unhelpful, but I don't know. They are publicly available through the web, so that's the place though, and they will direct you where to go. And I'm sure actually, Pat, where the website is for NPS.
You know, Pat?
Yes, if you'll leave me your card, I can just...
With respect to the BP spill, again, Pat, and I don't want to point out anybody else, Pat can do that if you want. Few folks here that work in that branch office are here, and can probably direct you in the right direction, but he's our branch office manager.
Because they are actively telling the community to call the Coast Guard, so I just wanted to let you guys know that
Okay, great.
you're going to get a lot of calls.
Pat, is that you want to comment on that? Because that's a big deal for us.
I would like to provide that information to Representative Roxton's office, and he has been putting that out to the community.
Okay.
When they say Coast Guard, you're talking about the local sector commander?
No, to the National Pollution Fund Center.
Okay, and you got Representative Miller here today.
Okay.
But again, that should be, when they say call the Coast Guard, I am sure that's what they mean, is the National Pollution Fund Center.
They should be a
And
little
yes,
bit
they
more
oversee the
explicit with that. We appreciate that question, because I had mentioned before that I thought that was going to be a monster.
Okay, thanks for that.
Because they're not being specific.
I'm sorry.
This gentleman right here,
He's
please.
one of the panel members.
No, it's fine, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I just want to start Open 90 for some background. Are they looking at Open 90 as far as redrafting? Are we looking at that? Who's doing that? Just as we get into this meeting.
I'm sure Carson Miller's representative can talk to it, but I will say yes. There have been a lot of bills put on the House floor and the Senate floor to talk about amendments. It's a very complex piece of legislation. It talks about response plans for vessels, response plans for facilities. It talks about who pays in incidents. And it can talk about as much as the President and Congress wanted to talk about. And there were a lot of pieces of it, limitations of liability for That's been a hot topic of conversation because in many spills, actually, the limitation of liability is exceeded pretty early, but the responsible party, those that are larger, will continue to play because of their interest in their corporate identity and liability. So yes, but that's well beyond.
Right.
That's about.
That's fine. I just want to make sure somebody's looking at it because it has a management structure in there that, it's a little different than how we deal with everything else.
And that's a great point. The area contingency plan is based on the, Ashley said, all the various environmental response statutes, clean environment statutes. In today's world, most other crises that are typically natural, sometimes man-made, are handled under the emergency declaration process of what we call the Stafford Act. The hazardous and oil pollution response statutes are a federals in charge, top-down process specifically designed for these types of events. It doesn't go away in a hurricane or earthquake or other crisis. It still exists, but those other crises are based on the traditional. The local guy starts to try to take care of it first. If the locals can't do it, they ask for help from the governor, who may or may not declare a disaster area, who then may or may not turn to the federal government. And the national response framework is set up that the federal government supports the state and local authorities in providing resources. And the Federal Emergency Management Agency helps administer that process for the federal government, and it's a flow of resources to support local folks. This contingency plan is set up that spill happens. It's a unified command that consists of the federal on-scene coordinator, who may be Coast Guard person or EPA in the coastal zone, it's a Coast Guard person. A state on-scene coordinator, usually from the environmental management agency of that department, who's a pre-designated person who may be running around the whole state, one person or two people to do it, and the responsible party. And the framework is that the responsible party is supposed to, typically the bigger ones, have had a plan that has been approved by EPA or the Coast Guard. They jump into action and start working under their plan, under the supervision of the federal on-scene coordinator or state on-scene coordinator. And those are the three people at the table. Now, there may be other people involved, like tribal partners, or, some local folks, but that's the organizational construct. So it looks a lot different. So when we had a huge crisis last summer, mayors and county executives and governors who were used to responding to a hurricane, that they were in charge and they got to do, were a little bit frustrated that we had, what's the federal government doing in here telling me what to do and telling PP what to do? I'm used to. But that's the framework. So that's the difference you're talking about. And whether we should get rid of that framework and throw everything under maybe a Stafford Act-like approach is a piece of conversation that's not. I can't, the plan is based on the current opening. Good question.
And then it could be a matter of just incorporating a concept under the OPA process, so it gives a little bit more local control or input. So as you design,
that's a good question.
Look at the management structure,
a
good way to look at it is let's incorporate that natural disaster side into this to make it work better.
That's a great piece, and it sounds like, now, the seat at the table or the input to the process is one thing. Unfortunately, the Congress has directed me that I have to be in charge.
Correct.
So even if I would like to let the mayor be in charge, unfortunately, but the way to bring him to the table is the right process.
Correct.
And to the degree, I, as a federal on-scene coordinator, in conjunction with the state, I get like 51% of the vote as a federal, which is how it's set up. But to the degree that we in the NOAA Scientific Support Coordinator want to direct the responsible party to do something, I can only do that within the context of what the law requires him to do. So even if I would like him to build a brand new beach someplace, Or let's say, for example, we want to build a berm way offshore to protect the coastline from oil, maybe like Louisiana. There's a degree to which, under the legal authority, I can't correct it, even though it might be protected. So we've got to operate that.
Well, this gentleman right here.
Well, he's my boss, so I'm going to let him speak before I do.
You know, I did that yesterday, and I told somebody when they diverted, and they wanted to talk again, I said, you lost your chance.
Well, I hope I don't lose my chance.
I'm going to give you your chance right now.
Okay. Well, and I really appreciate your comments, and I think that it's not an either-or. I think that there really is room for there to be a combined, and especially in this instance, because it was an isolated release site offshore, that there is room for the federal and the responsible party to have a radius around the release site to do your actions. Once that material escapes that, I think what happened, from my perspective, at ground level of Escambia County, is that the Coast Guard was being asked to not only manage that part of it, but also get into the localities to which even you mentioned that the state has limited resources. The county, however, under the ICS system, we have the ability to do that. So I think that maybe that's where the legislature or the Congress can help solve that issue, is to have a radius around the release site, and then once that incurs, that incursion into the local environment, that gives the local authority in the ICS system the ability to then get in there and use our local knowledge, because as we saw, this is multidimensional. When we looked at the ACP on April the 28th and saw where the boom was being deployed up at Tark Hill, and they were following the environmental sensitivity map.
Yeah.
I worked on this as an undergraduate at University of West Florida. I recognized what was happening, but it wasn't taking into account the multidimensional nature of the threat, the location, the hydrography, the geography. None of that was taken into account, and when we put together our plan, it took that into account, but we had a difficult time implementing the plan because the power structure was such that we just didn't have a real meaningful ability, and that was frustrating to us because we felt that we could do we could have a meaningful protection of our citizenry and our environment, but we just didn't really have the opportunity to implement. And one other quick thing, I liked Ashley's slide that showed all the aspects of it, but I think that a real important part of that, in addition to boom is defensive, skimmers are offensive, and the removal of oil and best management practices for removal of oil should have its separate place on there, because I think that's actually more important than this.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
That's a very good point. In fact, the first phase was the boom wars, then it was the skimmer wars, right? It was the skimmers. People were counting boom, and people were counting skimmers. And of course, that's helpful when you have recovered oil. This is sort of an odd kind of oil, and the skimming was the places we do it, a lot of places we put it, particularly with the dispersant application. It's designed to do it. I think it's a very good point about county resources. And my seat of the pants assessment is that since 9/11, counties have received substantial funding to set up emergency management operations that maybe were not envisioned in the original phases of Open ID and kind of how this was. Would you maybe agree with that?
Yes.
That the emergency management capacities of counties are just so much more substantial than they used to be in the early days of this. In fact, really the resources were all at the federal level almost to do this. And that's a great piece that I can't do anything. But what I can do when we do pollution